In this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling into the life and crimes of Ed Gein. Yes, the serial killer that was made famous in movies like Psycho and Silence of the Lambs. Now, you may have seen the Netflix series, which certainly took some liberties with the story, but we're going to profile this sadistic killer and his horrific post mortem crimes. As always, I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, can you believe the post-mortem crimes of Ed Gein, the skin mask, the tools made from bones of his victims? What stands out to you in this horrific case?
Well, what stands out to me is the fact that he was actually very good at making pieces of furniture, making trinkets for his house out of people's skin. And not only that, he knew exactly when to dig up graves during the year. He knew exactly when the flesh would be most fresh for him. I mean, it's unbelievable, John, what this guy was doing.
Yeah, and we see his crimes with some of his victims, and we talk about the skin lampshades. But to me, the whole thing of knowing when to dig them up, how to cut them up, and what to make out of the bones, the skin, the flesh of his victims, he was a true not only serial killer but grave robber, and we're gonna dig into it today. Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy wine. So, why serial killers and wine? Well, I'm the only award winning winemaker in the world that has captured a serial killer. And each episode, myself and my co host, Brandy Diamond, who's also the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can hear on Spotify, Apple, and all your favorite platforms. Well, together we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Yep, not just the U.S., all around the world. Now, I've got my favorite Casaro wine with me today, and it's our latest true crime and wine to be released. We just released it this week. It's called Cold Case. See how we did the murder map? Yeah, Cold Case. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. So you pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And as always, make sure you tag your friends and share the show with other true crime and wine lovers.
Great to be here again with you, John. I think it's been busy. You have been busy moving around doing live shows. What's kept you busy with True Crime and Wine this weekend?
Man, I tell you, I've been on the road and it's a triple header for me this weekend. I don't know if I'm going to make it through. We'll see. Last night, we did a live show up far, far north Texas, up by the Red River. Matter of fact, I could see Oklahoma from the front deck. It was great, wonderful show. Back down here this morning at the command center doing the podcast. And then tomorrow, another special show over at Casaro Winery in Ovilla, just south of Dallas. So triple header weekend doing True Crime and Wine. And let me tell you, we've had requests coming in from all over the country. Thank you, folks, for DMing us on social media, JJ True Crime and Wine. We already have nearly every month booked. We've got some openings, but I can tell you every single month I'm going to be in California in January. We're doing Texas tour in February. March we're going to be in Italy in March and April, and maybe working in some true crime with some wine. I'll let you know
Oh,
about that. We're going to be in Vegas in May. And so, yeah, I looked at the calendar yesterday, and you're right. nearly every month has at least one true crime and wine book, and in some states we're doing two or three. But that's great. I'm glad that people love listening to the podcast, and
Yes.
I'm glad they like going to the live show.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm hoping we are gracing everyone's presence in Vegas together. So I look forward to Vegas, and it's going to be a busy spring. But we are here today to talk about Ed Gein. So let's jump right into this, John. Our show is so different because you're a cop, you solved a serial killer case, the eyeball killer. I hope everyone's already listened to that episode. But gosh, Ed Gein, everybody's talking about Ed Gein right now. Not only were all of these different movies inspired by his character, but they just came out with a show about Ed Gein and his life. So let's talk about his early life, John.
Yeah, and Netflix has that popular show right now, and you're right, Brandy. We're a little bit different. We're not going to we're not doing this for television ratings, right? We don't take little tidbits of facts and turn them into stories that, that's why they say based on or inspired by. We give you the facts, right? I'm a cop.
That's right.
We give you the facts. We look at court documents, we look at testimony. That's what we use to try to put our show together. That's why it's a little bit different. I was actually doing a live version of A Cup of Murder last night. And in that show, the serial killer actually turned her victims into tea cakes. And the audience was asking me, where'd you get the recipe? I actually got the recipe out of the court transcripts. So,
Yeah.
that's kind of what we do on this show. But yeah, his early childhood, Brandy, was like so many others. He suffered multiple childhood traumas. His mother was domineering. We've seen that before, and a
Yeah.
religious fanatic. Well, his father was the polar opposite. He was an alcoholic and abusive. And it was said that he would beat Ed so severely that it made his ears ring. And some doctors even said that may have led to the stutter that he had. Now, Ed was different than some of the serial killers that we've talked about recently in that his IQ was 70 to 80. So
Yeah.
you take a young man that's verbally abused, physically abused, domineering, religiously fanatic mother, low IQ, already a loner, already kind of separated because of his looks, his stutter,
Yeah.
just not a good upbringing. And his mother, who was a religious fanatic, said she wanted him away from the sinful city life, and they moved to a farm in Plainfield. Let me get it right. See, I've got it in my head. Plainfield, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Brandy and I talked about that before the show. We both
Yeah.
know people in Plainview, and I
Yes, we
said
do.
it. So
Yeah.
Plainfield, Wisconsin, long way from Texas.
Yes.
But that was kind of his very early days.
Yeah. Well, most of these cases we're covering, we're seeing the childhood trauma, right? Things that, abusive parents, religious fanatical mother, um, low IQ. And gosh, I think of developing a stutter because you're hit so hard. And it made me think of there's actually a comedian, John, that stutters, and he was kicked by a horse. And they
Wow.
believe that so I'm not surprised to see this. So, but just it's terrible and poor hygiene. He
Well,
was already a loner, right? So he's raised on a farm. Again, we see them being sent to school in dirty clothes and not being able to really communicate with others.
Well, and I've talked to several people recently. It's amazing the people that show up at the live shows, and I love doing the podcast. I love doing radio when I had a national radio show, but the live shows, there's nothing like it because people come up to you afterwards and tell you so much, and some is good and some is bad. But I ended up talking to a doctor after one of the shows, and he said, "Hey, we are doing extensive studies now on the brains of not only serial killers, but serial rapists and folks like that. And we're seeing a correlation with traumatic brain injury, TBI, and how some of these folks may be affected. So you bringing up about the comedian being kicked, Ed being beat, we've seen this with a couple other serial killers with that when they've had falls as children. So there may be some medical correlation between the TBI and what it does to the brain, especially
Mhm.
during development at a young age. And maybe that is where he got the stutter. But how many times have you and I talked about this? Just in the last 6, 8 podcasts, 10 podcasts.
Mhm.
Poor hygiene, impoverished,
Mhm.
loner, stutter, or some physical disability. It just kind of ostracizes these folks
Yes.
from a very early age from their peers, right?
Yeah. Well, and really the most important years, right? Your social skills are developing. You're developing being around people. You learn how to get along. You learn how to share. Like there's all kinds of things in those childhood years that really develop how you're going to end up. And we're seeing this over and over. And I mean, substance abuse parents. I mean, we talked about it. Going to school. That was there any animal abuse in this? Fascination with bondage? What do we know anything about Ed Gein this early on?
Yeah, not some of those other precursors that we've seen with other serial killers. We do know he was a kind of loner, kept to himself on the farm, did chores on the farm, never really dated or had a social life. So that was a great point you made about, during these young years is when we develop our social skills. But if you're isolated and
Right.
if people don't like you because of the way you look, the way you smell, the way you talk, you're not going to get to develop those social skills like other people.
Yeah.
Um, because of his isolation on the farm, he became really dependent on his mother and
Yes.
developed let's just say, an abnormally close relationship with his mother. And you can see if the dad was abusive and alcoholic and pushed him away, and the mother was
Mhm.
super religiously fanatical, he gravitated towards his
Absolutely.
mother.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I also think of like, did he witness this kind of thing going on between the father and the mother? Was the father, I'm sure the father wasn't just abusive to him. Was there other abuse that he witnessed? And maybe there's a protection to that, right? Maybe there's a sense of like loyalty to her. And we're going to kind of see this when it comes to the grave robbing and the fact he really just couldn't live without her. I
Right?
mean, that's kind of the way I felt kind of going through this case is he really missed her and a big piece of him was gone. So, but
You can almost see the scenes from
yes.
Psycho and the mother in the rocking chair. Norman Bates could not part with her. A bit of
Yeah.
trivia that I read when we were studying up on this is the gentleman who wrote the book of which Psycho
Mm,
was based on lived just 70 miles away from Plainfield. So it was kind of a story that was in his backyard. He followed it and followed it in the news. And that is what inspired him to write the book of which
mhm.
Alfred Hitchcock based the famous movie on. But yeah, you can
Wow.
almost see this connection that he just can't let go of his mom. He loves her. And even after she's gone, he can't let go of her.
Their dad dies in around 1940. Ed and his brother began taking odd jobs. They're now supporting the family. It's now just them three. So what do we know about the family dynamics? Did the brothers get along with each other?
Well, the brothers got along, but Henry criticized Augusta, their mother, over her control over Ed. And he became distant and said, I just can't watch this. I can't watch how you're controlling your son like this. And we're brothers and we're working and
Mhm.
helping the family farm, but you're too domineering. You've got to let go. The farm kind of deteriorated. Then in 1944, there was a brush fire on the farm that was very, let's say, mysterious. And Ed found Henry dead of smoke inhalation with burns on his forehead. Well, now looking back on it, it's pretty
Mhm.
easy to see that connection. Henry did not like the relationship between Ed and his mother. Ed did not want to sever that relationship, and it was a mysterious fire that took out Henry.
Mhm.
There wasn't an autopsy, by the way, and many later, of course, suspected Ed, and they said, hey, he wanted to get rid of his brother because now there was no battle for mom's affection.
You know,
So
we
we
talk
go ahead.
Y John, we talked about this in the movie or the series, right? About Ed Gein, and you and I talk about, like we always say, facts, right? Facts is what we focus on this show, what I focus on my show, and we know that that documentary pulled out some interesting things and added to this. So a part of what we wanted to do today is say, yes, this really happened. No, this did not happen. And so there is a scene of him hitting his brother dying on the farm, putting brush over him, starting the fire. So, you know, that piece of it actually true. Whether he hit him or not, we don't really know. There was an autopsy done, but he mysteriously died of smoke
Right.
inhalation, right? And so we actually know, could this have been at the hands of his brother? And, you know, but that part of this is true. So we want to
Could
make
that
sure
have
we know
been
this is. Yeah.
could that have been his first kill? And if
Yeah.
so, what inspired it was the fight, right? What inspired it was the jealousy between brothers over the mother's affection. And if Ed was over the top, right, about his
Right.
feelings for his mother, you can easily see one brother taking out the other. And when you kind of piece it together, okay, looking back from a criminal perspective, a blow to the head may not have killed him, probably did not kill him. And again, without an autopsy, it's hard to tell. But if the brother did die of smoke inhalation, he was alive when he was set on fire. So this very could have been the very first kill and a horrific act of jealousy by
Uh-huh.
Ed Gein to kill his own brother to have his mother's attention and love.
Yeah. Well, it's not long after in 1945. I mean, within a year, Augusta dies. And
Yeah.
so what do we know about the mom's death and how is he handling it?
Well, she suffered a stroke. So now can you imagine? You work yourself up. Dad dies 1940. 4 years later, you and your brother are trying to make the farm and everything, but the brothers aren't getting along, and Henry's really on Augusta. You got to let Ed go. You're too domineering. Y'all are too close. All of a sudden, Henry mysteriously dies. Well, then Ed thinks he's going to be alone with his mom for the rest of his life. Everything's going to be happy and beautiful, and she has a stroke. And not only does she have a stroke, but it doesn't kill her right away. And Ed is the one that has to nurse her for months until the end of the year when she finally passes away. So if you couldn't make the bond any stronger, and you know, I don't know if you've been in that situation, but when you're somebody's caretaker and you're with them night and day and feeding them and washing them and clothing them and
Mhm.
everything, it's just it's as close of a bond as you could possibly get. But he loses her
Yeah.
at the end of 1945. He said it was like losing part of his soul.
All right, John. Shortly after his mother passes away, starting in 1945, he starts grave robbing. So let's talk about this and how he was pulling this off.
Well, he had developed obviously this fantasy about his mother, and it really turned into an obsession to the point where he couldn't let her go. And the only way to keep her alive around with him was he wanted to build another mother. And he started robbing graves. And we see this psychological shift from these feelings about his mother up to necrophilia with some of these bodies. And it just wasn't any graves he robbed. He specifically picked fresh graves of middle-aged women that resemble Augusta, his mother. So he would search the obituaries, go to the cemetery, and find women that resembled his mother, and then go at night using a hoist that he developed to get the bodies out. He'd have sex with them sometimes, and then take them back to the farm and take various body parts. Now, he harvested skin and bones to make trophies. He said his goal was to create a woman suit to embody his mother. And we know he created an entire mask and used the bones to create tools, lampshades. There was all kinds of things he made, but he specifically robbed graves of women that resembled his mother. And one of the theories was, when we start looking at, he's a grave robber, and he does this for years, right? Over a decade he does this. And then we see that there are murders involved later on. And some people have theorized that he was in Wisconsin, remember? So in the winter months, when it was too cold to actually dig up these graves, even right after they were buried, he would murder victims to get the skin and the bones and things he needed. So not often do we see a modern day case of grave robbing. And it's really called grave robbing because it dates back thousands of years, right? To the pharaohs, to the pyramids. They would rob the graves, not for the victims, but for the jewels, the coins, the money, the furniture, anything that was buried with the victim that had value. But now we see that means nothing to Ed Gein. He's not looking to take jewelry off of fingers. He's looking to build another mother.
Which is, there's a lot to unravel. There's a lot to unravel here psychologically, right? He goes from missing his mother, wanting to replace her in so many words, right? But then going to the necrophilia piece of this, and having sex with them, like that's not what he was doing with his mother, right?
Or was it?
We don't, or was he?
Or was
we don't
it?
know. We don't know.
Was that what Henry was concerned about? Remember, years before, Henry said, "Mom, you've got this relationship with Ed that is not normal." Was Henry maybe way back then raising that red flag and saying he's got a low IQ? He's a loner, right? He maybe had traumatic brain injury. Maybe Henry knew what Mom was doing with young Ed, and maybe that's what led to Henry's demise. Maybe Henry was going to blow the whistle.
Oh my gosh!
Why did that fire happen in that field? Right? Maybe Henry was going to blow the whistle. So maybe there was something going on that was never documented or reported, but young Henry knew.
Well, and this religious fanatical thing, right? Telling him he's living in sin. You can't go date. You can't do this. Keeping him from society to herself, which can increase all kinds of manipulation, especially in someone with such a low IQ. But gosh, John, what happens behind closed doors? There's a lot about this guy. In this case, we do not know, but we know he was grave robbing for about 12, 13 years. And John, how did he never get caught? I think about using a hoist. I think of him in the graveyard. Like, how was he able did anybody ever stumble upon him? Did he have an excuse? You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes through my head when
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this.
And again, we're not a television series. We're not going to go off
Right.
on some wild tangent or whatever. I couldn't find any documents of him actually being accosted in the cemetery.
Wow.
And for somebody with a very low IQ like this, that
I
is
know.
very strange that he's able to get there after these people are buried, use a hoist, get them out, and take the bodies, and nobody notices. Right?
That's what I'm
Nobody
wild.
notices. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so he's in the Plainfield Cemetery. You already mentioned digging up middle aged. He would look at the obituaries, see who just passed away. He took the heads, he took the skins. I mean, gosh, and he was making trinkets and furniture in his house. What else was he doing with these bodies, John? I
Well,
mean,
and we pretty sure I did read some of the uh, background on this, that he at one point even did at least dig into Augusta's grave. So I
okay.
I I I couldn't confirm that he did anything with her body, but he did dig into the grave at one point, that we know. Matter of fact, we know
Wow.
for sure that he robbed around 20 graves. I think he actually said about double that number is what he said he did. They probably tied him to about 20. And all of them were blondes, middle-aged, and had a resemblance to Augusta. He would then take them and bury them in shallow graves in his yard, right, in his
Right.
Plainfield home out on the farm, or he stored them in sheds on the property. He took their heads, their skin, their hearts, and mostly upper torso so that he could build a suit out of the skin.
I can't only imagine what they came across going through his property once he is discovered with this. But John, okay, you mentioned the skin. Then we were reading that he tans it with the salt. He then
Yep.
is using stitching for masks and outfits. They found 9 heads. I mean, what kind of body parts are now they, what was you mentioned what he was taking, but how did he learn to do this? Like, how did he know
Yeah,
to do this?
I think it's growing up on the farm, right? Growing up on the
Okay.
farm, butchering animals, right? You've got a lot of different animals on the farm. Not only animals that you butcher for food, but animals that naturally die. And then you're like, okay, we're going to use that, whether he's got cows, goats, sheep, pigs, whatever. But when you grow up on a farm, when you grow up in a rural area and go hunting, right? It's a hunting season down in Texas right now, and I know every year I used to take my boys, right, and they learn from an early age. We have wild hogs on the ranch, we have deer on the ranch, we have all kinds of animals out there. We have birds that we hunt, whether it's doves or ducks or whatever. But you learn. Right? You learn how to skin the animals. You learn how to tan the hides. That's been done for thousands of years. It's not difficult, right, with salt to tan the hide and stretch it and dry it out and all of it. So, I think some of those are basic skills that maybe folks just growing up on a farm, on a ranch, in a rural community learn that maybe folks growing up in a city don't. But stitching them into masks and outfits and lampshades and chairs, yeah, that's not normal. Making a waste paper basket from skin, right?
Mm.
Anyway, we're not getting to his arrest yet, but I'll just tell you that when he was finally caught, they counted at least 9 heads that he had removed from these graves, because we're still talking about the grave robbing here, but it was much more than
Mhm.
grave robbing, right? He
That's
was
right.
taking the bodies having sex with some of them, then cutting him up after he stored him in his shed or kept him in the yard, and cutting him up. They found 9 heads, 30 identifiable large pieces of human skin that were not used yet, as well as those other things that we just talked about. Now, he confessed and said, yeah, I think I robbed about 40 graves. They had evidence to tie him to at least 20, if not a few more.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I'm trying to get past the wastebasket from Skin. I don't think I've bought that or found that anywhere lately. And did he get bored? I don't know. I just think like maybe he was just seeing how good he could be at some of this. And he wasn't okay just, tanning it. I mean, what could he then? He just became very creative with what he was trying to do, almost like a hobby. I don't know, very, very strange. Okay, so we already
Yeah,
see
you
some
can,
of it,
right.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can see him trying to create a mother, almost like a
Yeah.
Frankenstein movie, right?
Yes, thank
I
you.
mean, in some
Yes.
parts of this, I go back to the old Frankenstein movies of my youth, and they're trying to reanimate. I don't know if he is trying to reanimate, but I think he felt if he could make a skin mask, a skin suit, and put it
Mhm.
on, right, of
Mhm.
these
Right.
women that look like his mother,
Mhm.
if he could put it
Mhm.
on, he could some way be closer to his mother again.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again, the necrophilia, like I'm kind of leaning towards what you were saying, that there probably was some um some things going on with his mother that shouldn't have been going on with his mother, even probably from a very young age.
Right.
All right.
And it would
So
make
right.
sense if
Mhm.
Henry knew about it and he was the older brother, right?
Well, and we know he left, right? We know he got out of that situation for quite a while. There is belief that he went and either was trying to start another life, but he missed his brother. I mean, there were, I was reading some things that there was a connection between them, and maybe he was trying to give Ed some protection of some level.
That's what I was going to
You
say.
know, yeah,
Doesn't the older sibling try to protect the younger
that's
sibling,
right.
right?
Yeah,
That's natural.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, we're not even too. Gein is a serial killer, and
right.
from his murders that we know about, right? That we absolutely can tie him to. He doesn't even technically fit the definition of a serial killer. Now we're going to talk about other crimes that are involved in, and I think then he would meet the definition. But from a profiling standpoint, victimology on the grave robbing, very easy, right? White, female, middle age, blonde. Quite frankly, they were just women that resembled his mother, and he felt he could get body parts to use to rebuild or build something that resembled his mother or something he could wear. So when we start looking at profiling, the victimology is really straightforward here, right?
I believe so.
Um,
Hmm.
crime scene at the cemetery. Let's talk about crime scene. Certainly from a geographic profiling standpoint, it was a comfort zone for him. He kept going back over
I know.
20 times. He kept going back, but he brought the equipment that he needed with him, including shovels and hoist and things to transport the body. So from that standpoint, it was very organized. You look at pictures from his farm, it looks the total opposite.
That's right.
Very disorganized, at least some parts. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So I can see some very organized parts when we look at
Hmm.
both the crime scene and the killer, just from a profiling standpoint, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he knew exactly what he needed to bring with him to accomplish what he was trying to accomplish. He was bold enough to keep going back, which is very interesting again with someone of his IQ, of knowing, I don't know, like there was no fear of getting caught. And maybe if he did, he was going to have an excuse. I'm not quite sure, but he would again return to the same exact spot. You don't necessarily see that all the time, but he's robbing the same cemetery and looking in the same obituaries. So very interesting how
But it,
organized he was in that part of his life.
yeah, and like most killers, he doesn't need an excuse, right? He's a
That's it.
killer. He's a grave robber, and if he gets caught, he gets caught. He's not thinking about consequences. He's thinking
That's right.
about his goal, his objective. And his
That's right.
objective at this point is making a suit of skin to resemble his mother. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro winery brands, and it's fitting to share with everybody what I'm enjoying today. It's our newest True Crime and Wine branded wine, our cold case. And we designed a murder board specifically for this cold case. Now, this is a dry red wine, and it's a blend of our Graciano and Tempranillo. Yes, two Spanish-based wines grown right here in Texas. Now, the Graciano contributes plum and blackberry notes, while the Tempranillo adds that little bit of spice, making it a wonderful combination and drinkable dry red wine. And of course, there's absolutely no better wine to enjoy when you're listening to True Crime and Wine. Salute.
Okay, John. So we've had about 12, 13 years of grave robbing out of Ed Gein, but now we're going into 1954. What happens on December 8th of that year?
And this is when we really get into the murders portion of the story, right? Up to this point, he's been doing the grave robbing and everything else. But on December 8th, 54, he attacks a tavern owner, Mary Hogan. Well, Brandy, what do you think Mary looks like?
Uh,
She's a
a
give
mother,
me a
his
guess.
mother,
His
um,
mother.
his mother.
Yeah. She's a white female, 51, tall, blonde. He's been robbing these graves of women that are freshly dead that resembled his mother. Now he's attacking the living, though. He hits her in the head with a hammer and then shoots her. He takes her back to his farm where he decapitates her. Now, here, her head stays in a box under his bed for years. He
Ugh.
kept her head in a box under the bed, and he scattered body parts around the house. And of course, she resembled his dead mother. Now, she was reported missing, but not found for 3 years.
I mean, the smell, John. I can only imagine the smells that were going on in this house. I know in the show they show police going to his house. I don't know, but body parts scattered around the house, resembling the mother. You know, do we know if he knew Mary? I think he ended up like going into, do we know why he attacked her? I mean, why do you think now he's moving from digging up dead women to now killing women who are alive?
Yeah, this goes back to that theory that someone had proposed, and we talked about it earlier, that when the ground was so hard that he absolutely
Mm-hmm.
couldn't dig up even the freshest of graves, that he wanted to continue to build his woman. He needed more skin. He needed more body
Mm-hmm.
parts, and he had to satisfy that. Now, we're going to see at the very end of the show that there probably were some other live victims during this time, but at least the theory of, hey, it was too cold, December, Wisconsin, snow, ground frozen, probably needed to find a live victim, and there's not a coincidence that she looked like his mother.
Yeah, so I do go and wonder, with those 12, 13 years of grave robbing, were there other victims? Was he already doing this? But I don't know. I think there's maybe a lot of Ed Gein victims we may not know about. But now we're in 1957, again, cold, November 16th of that year.
Yep. Yep. Getting towards Thanksgiving. Ageen walked into Bernice Worden's hardware store there in Plainfield. He shot her once in the head with a rifle. Actually, a rifle that he had bought from the store. They had actually found a receipt, and what that
Mm,
receipt is one of the things that tied him to the crime. He then stole $40 and dragged her body to his truck before he took it home. So
mm.
again, she also resembled his mother. So he is staying with the same victimology here, whether they're dead, grave robbing, or alive, and he kills them. And he's being very organized about his crimes, right? Even with a
Yeah.
low IQ, he's bringing a weapon, whether it's a hammer or a hammer and a gun, um, to the store for both of these victims, kills them, and then takes the body back to the farm to do what he wants. So, from a profiling standpoint, we certainly see that he is being very consistent in victimology, in his method and mode, his MO, in excuse me, in bringing weapons with him to the crime scene, in having transportation to take the body back to the farm, and then certainly organized in what he's doing out there at the farm.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing the comfort zone as his farm, the house, bringing them back, dragging them back, doing things there, cutting them up, leaving, but not getting really rid of anything, right? Maybe trying to disguise some of that, building lampshades and other things that people may not know are actually skin. It could look like leather, right? Or just something that he's purchased. So I definitely see that being that crime scene comfort zone. But now we can now talk about the serial killer aspects of him, John, right?
Well, I mean, this is his second known victim that we know of. You want to talk about Henry? Well, there's three, and it kind of
Yep.
qualifies, but we're going
Yep.
to also find about some other possible victims later. But the suspicions start to build around Ed at this point. Police discovered that Bernice was last seen at her store and in the presence of none other than Ed Gein. They also find a receipt at the store. They know that Gein has been there, and it's a receipt for a 22 rifle. And what I thought was really interesting from a law enforcement standpoint is the sheriff. When he went to raid Gein's farm, he was accompanied by his deputy, Frank Warden, who was her son and who eventually led the investigation into his mother's death. So we again have this
Uh,
mother son angle playing out, but in a totally different way. The son is a law enforcement officer that's trying to figure out what happened to the mom. And just as
uh,
you said a few minutes ago, Brandy, when the officers kicked the door,
uh,
the smell of the decaying flesh and the rotting bodies just overwhelmed them. And then, if that wasn't enough, they actually saw a blood trail that they followed to the shed where
uh,
Geen was doing most of his dirty work. But I could tell you, matter of fact, at the True Crime and Wine show last night, somebody asked me, I don't know why, sometimes we get some of the
mm,
strangest questions.
yeah.
Um, can you describe the smell of a dead body? And I said, I honestly can't describe it, but it never leaves me.
Yeah.
I've been to too many crime scenes. I've seen too
Yeah.
many dead bodies. And I've seen too much decaying flesh. and it is a smell that never ever leaves you. When you try to go home at the end of your shift and you try to wash and you try to take your shower and you try to, clear your head, it is a smell that never ever leaves you. And any time you smell it again, everything comes rushing back. All of those other murders, all of those other crimes, all of those trips to the morgue. So can I, maybe I'm not articulate enough to describe the smell, but is something that as a career law enforcement officer never ever goes away. And just hearing about, reading about, seeing the reaction of the officers as they enter the door, I knew exactly what they were smelling and exactly how that made them feel. It's kind of hard to
Yeah.
explain sometimes.
Well, John, I've asked other law enforcement that question, and really just in general, what is that, the smell, the feel, right? Like you said, it all just comes back to you when you smell it again. And they've all given the same answer as you did, John. They can't describe it. It's undescribable. It's just almost like an experience. And once you've experienced and once you've been there and present, you never forget it. And it rushes back to you. I don't want to get off topic, but it reminds me of Casey Anthony's mother when she calls in about the smell in her daughter's trunk, right? And she says those exact words. I can tell there's been a dead body in this trunk. It's not something you can describe. It's just when you know it. And her husband was law enforcement. I mean, when you smelt it, it never leaves you. And
It
I can
never leaves you.
only imagine. I can only
Yeah.
imagine when they enter this house with everything that he's made out of skin, with all of the decomposition that has been in there from the bodies that were already deceased that he brought in there. I mean, I can only imagine. And now there's going to be some other grisly discoveries going on.
Yeah, they follow the blood trail, right? The
Yeah.
smell hits them at the house, absolutely overwhelming. But they see a blood trail. They're still looking for Bernice. They don't know if she's alive. They don't know if she's dead. Obviously, her son is there. He's hoping she's alive. They see the blood trail. They're gonna follow the blood trail, right? The
Right.
stuff in the house isn't going anywhere. Okay?
Right.
They follow it to the shed. They discover Bernice hanging upside down by her ankles. She's decapitated in her heart. She's decapitated. She's gutted like a deer, and her heart is missing. Absolutely, absolutely. Can you imagine being that
No.
son? Can you imagine being the deputies? Can you imagine being that sheriff and seeing that? They then go back to the house and they find her head in a box, just like the previous victim. They haven't even found yet because her head's in a box under the bed where it's been for 3 years. And they find Bernice's heart on the stove. So
Oh my
an
God.
absolutely overwhelming sight for those officers, the smell, what they saw, what they smelled, everything. I mean, you talk about traumatized for the rest of your life. There's no way you get over this type of just grisly, inhumane discoveries.
The people in this town just thought he was awkward, right? I think that I
Ah,
go back to that, right? Like just an odd guy. And then to walk into this and think you know someone, like, and to know you've been completely wrong this whole time. I mean, just wild, just I
yeah.
can only imagine what they were thinking.
Well, so now they're like, oh my God, what house of horrors have we walked into? What,
Yeah.
how, and now imagine this, Brandy, and I don't know if you've seen a lot of the pictures from the crime scenes. It is worse than any episode of Hoarders you've ever seen because it's junk,
That's right.
trash, body parts, food, decomposing bodies, everywhere that they look. We're not
Yeah.
going to get to Augusta's room yet. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But when they make initial entry into the house, there are piles and stacks of trash and debris and the most wildest things that you could ever imagine. They found masks made from skin that were in bags. They found, and we've talked about this before, the number one most cannibalized part of a person when we talk about serial killers, and up to
Yes.
40% of them are cannibals. They found a belt of nipples. They found a skull on top of the bed springs and chairs and bedspreads made from skin. Mary's head, the first victim, remember, 1954,
Mm-hmm.
was still in the same paper bag under the bed labeled mother.
Mm.
He used the skin from his victims, all of those grave robbings and the murders, to make gloves, leggings, and pretty much most of a full upper body suit. They
Okay.
found bones in a stew pot and lips used as a Venetian blind pull. Can you imagine walking into this scene, Brandy?
No.
Literally a
No.
scene of body parts. I mean, I'm not big on horror movies,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't even think of one. The most grotesque. I can't even think of one that gets anywhere near this.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. Like it is a true house of horrors. And I would almost even wonder if when police came upon this, besides the heads, which are obvious, like just looking at some of the stuff, the bedspreads, right? The Venetian, like I think maybe it even took a little bit for their brains to register what they were actually looking at and seeing and where do you begin? I mean, there's trash stacked from floor to ceiling. There's debris everywhere. There's dishes, food. I mean, where do you even start and begin? And I mean, no, John, I cannot even
And
imagine what is going on in this house.
and I've described some horrible things, and I left out of this intentionally other
Oh,
things that are just almost unbelievable. I cut them from the script. I was like, I can't even talk about this. I cannot even
yeah.
talk about this, and I left them out of the script. It just absolutely overwhelming, and especially again from somebody that's been there, done that, seen some of these horrific scenes. I can't imagine the trauma
I
that
know.
these officers experienced and the horrific acts done to these victims. Absolutely horrible. Grave robbing is one thing. They're dead.
Yeah.
They passed away. We
Right.
know at a very minimum that Mary and Bernice were alive. We
Hmm.
figure Henry was alive, and we'll talk about other victims. But yeah, just I hope we painted a picture for some of the listeners out there of the horrific scene that they walked into.
So now, what do we find in Mother's rooms? I mean, what was he doing with? Okay, let's just jump into it, John.
Go back to Psycho. Go back to Norman Bates. That's all. My head just keeps going back there, right? I
Yeah,
keep going
totally.
to that movie. So you've got a shed, decapitated woman hanging by her ankles, blood trail, heart removed, gutted. You go to the house and you're finding body parts. You have one head in a box. You find another head in the box under the bed in a bag labeled mother. You're finding these skin parts. You've got trash. You've got debris. Literally, I've seen the crime scene pictures of debris stacked 6, 7, 8 feet in the air. Now they enter the door to Augusta's room, and it's preserved like a shrine. Perfect.
Clean?
Clean. No trash. No debris. It is literally, one of the officers described it as a museum.
That is wild. Okay, John, what's going on? Okay, so my question is then, was this how his mother treated her home or her room? Was she a neat person? That's kind of where my thought, like, mother would want it to look this way type of thing. But how is he separating this? How is he living this lifestyle and then this room looks like this? What's your just the first
Right.
thought in profiling the mind with this?
Well, I mean, you're talking about a sociopath, but now you're talking about a schizophrenic. What other
Mm,
mental health disorder does he have? The evidence is that he's living, eating, sleeping in all the debris and all the trash and the dead bodies and the body parts. But to honor his mother, right, who he's got this weird fascination
mm,
relationship with years after she's dead, and keeping her room. And apparently it wasn't just her bedroom, but there was like a little, I wouldn't say office area, but another area, sewing area, I think it was, that she
mm.
used. And she had anywhere his mother, that was her domain, was
Yeah.
perfect. Absolutely. To me, I'm getting chills talking about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking about the most horrific of scenes, and the officers opening the door after door, and seeing horrific scene, horrific scene. And then they open a door, and I've
Mm,
actually got pictures, and I know exactly what the author of the book was seeing when he wrote it, and what Hitchcock was seeing when he directed the
mhm.
movie Psycho, because we actually have crime scene photos showing the two sides, if you will, of Ed Gein.
Wow. That's just, and no body parts in there? Nothing resembling
No,
mother in there? Nothing found in there. Wow.
no,
Wow.
no. Pristine, I think, is how one
Wow.
person described it, like a
Wow.
museum. Yep.
Unbelievable.
So
Okay.
let's kind of
Yeah, go ahead.
recap the profiling here just a little bit. That's what our show's about. The victimology was easy, right? Women that
Right.
resembled his mother, the women that he killed that were alive, we don't believe he had sex with them. We think he actually had sex with some of the dead bodies, though, after, from the grave robbing, or maybe even after the kill. Crime scenes were very organized, and that he brought tools to the cemetery and weapons to the murder. He dismembered his victims, and he made things from his victims: mask, furniture, a bodysuit. Some very, very kind of organized. His MO: he robbed graves or murdered victims to get the skin and the body parts that he needed. He took them back to the farm, cut them up, made trophies. Probably learned his skills through farming, growing up on the farm, and taxidermy, and focused on possessing his victims and
Yeah.
his transformation into his mother, wearing a
Wow.
bodysuit, wearing a skin mask that could make him feel like he was once again with his mother.
Absolutely wild, John. Absolutely wild.
Brandy and I are so happy that you joined us for our True Crime and Wine podcast, and we'd like to hear from you. So please leave us a review. Yeah, those reviews are important. And of course, pass along the podcast to your friends. Subscribe if you're on one of the channels that you can subscribe to. Leave us a review if you can do that, but always pass it on to some true crime lovers. We really appreciate you listening, and we hope you enjoy each and every episode of True Crime and Wine.
Safe to say he's going to get caught at this point. Hopefully, there's enough smell and evidence to start to question and arrest Ed Gein. So, this is in 1957. So, what happens during his arrest?
Well, so right after the officers find all this at the house, obviously overwhelming evidence there, and they simply started searching the neighborhood and went to a neighbor's, and Ed was sitting having coffee with a neighbor. And he was cooperative. He was chatty, they said. He didn't resist in any way. He had absolutely no remorse and no empathy. So we get back to our serial killer profiling, and these are these characteristics that we see over and over again. They have no remorse for their crime. They have no empathy for their victim. They had a task that they wanted to complete, and whether it was by digging up graves or killing people, they were going to complete the task. And when they asked him about it, he simply said, well, I had insane urges. Well, without knowing it, it really set him up for a defense that was going to last. Officers went back now with many, many officers and different agencies. And like I said, they found the decapitated body dangling from a hook in the shed. The mask on the bedpost made of skin. Something else I didn't tell you about, in the kitchen, they actually found jars, mason jars, labeled A to Z with body parts. Very, very similar to the serial killer that I captured, that we found all those jars, but they were animal parts and formaldehyde. He actually labeled the jars with the different body parts and kept them in his kitchen. They found a lampshade made of skin with dots for eyes on the lampshade, and a chair. I actually saw some crime scene photos of the chair, and part of the chair was made with human skin. So they had plenty of evidence. Let's say,
Yes.
you talk about a case, they weren't lacking any evidence. All right.
Yeah. Chair of human skin. I do see a picture of this chair, and the jars labeled A to Z. I mean, the cannibalism. I assume he was cooking with these body parts. I mean,
The heart was
just
on the
wild.
stove, remember?
Yeah, the heart was on
The
the
heart
stove.
was on the stove, right?
God. Ugh. All right.
Yeah.
So he's caught. Overwhelming amount of evidence. So what happens is there a trial?
Yeah,
Does he testify?
Yeah, of course, in 58, they bring him to a trial, but the judge rules he's unfit to stand trial and sends him to a mental institution. Um, he eventually did stand trial in 68 and was convicted of the murder of Bernice Wooden. During it, he did say that his mother told him to commit the crimes. There was a psychiatric evaluation. He was diagnosed as schizophrenic disorder and obviously untreated. He was found guilty, but still declared legally insane and committed back to the mental asylum indefinitely. So the trial a decade later was more just let's kind of clear the air, get the evidence out there, but there is no way that we're going to find him sane and send him to a prison. He is going to spend his life until he dies in a mental institution, which is what happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly insane. Schizophrenia, you brought that up, and finally having psychiatric evaluation of this. And then the farm burns down, John. Did they suspect it had anything to, well, I mean, I don't know who would want to have that standing in your town after finding all of this stuff, but what did they know about the fire?
It was a mysterious fire, but officials, their suspicions were community people, right? And simply wanting to get rid
Yeah.
Because after the crimes came out, it became, I'd hate to say it, almost a tourist
Yeah.
destination, right? And
Right.
certainly among the local community, people could not believe what they were reading in the newspapers. They couldn't believe the pictures that came out, the things that were released about what happened at this horrible, horrible place.
Mhm.
And it was drawing, let's just say, a lot of negative attention. It
Yeah.
mysteriously burned down. Arson was suspected. And any evidence that wasn't collected was gone. It
Was
was
gone.
totally burned to the ground. But, you know, thankfully, officers had done a really good job of documenting everything with the photos they took. And again, hats off to not only the detectives, but the evidence collection officers or whoever they were, the photographers that went in there and had to photograph this
Mm.
grisly scene.
Yeah, and I think like I said, just having that be in the center of your town and knowing what went down there. I mean, I'm sure it was just he's now gone. He's no longer there. Like, let's just move on from this. But John, there may have been additional victims that may have been linked to Geen.
And that's why we kind of include him in this serial killer category. So we know of Mary and Bernice. Those two
Yeah.
definitely are tied to him, linked to him, the two murders. We suspect Henry. Now, right there is three, right, which meets our
Right.
serial killer criteria. But Henry was in 1944. And Bernice and Mary weren't till 54 and 57. What happened in that gap? Well, when they started piecing some other evidence together, which a lot of times, is not followed up on by police or prosecutors, especially when you have a suspect in custody that'll never be released from custody. It would just be really clearing the case at that time. But you're talking about 50s. So we're not really, we don't have cold case units yet. We're not into it. So 44 is the fire with Henry. There's also a suspect, a suspicion that he killed a young girl in 47, one that he babysat. Remember, I told you some people hired Gein as a babysitter? Well,
Yeah.
one of the young girls he babysat actually disappeared in 1947. Then in 1952, there were some hunters that we believe hired Gein as a guide to take them hunting on his property or other property, who also disappeared. And then in 1953, there was a female that disappeared also en route home, and she had to pass by Gein's farm. This makes a lot more sense,
Hmm.
Brandy. You know how when we talk
Absolutely.
about some of these killers and we're like, wow, there's these big time periods that they just stopped killing? No, they didn't stop killing. You didn't find the bodies. You didn't find the crimes that occurred. And when you start reconstructing it, I think it was the Times Square killer that we went back and through DNA and genealogy started finding victims that filled in those gaps. So now there really isn't this huge gap between 44 and 54. It's 44, 47, 52, 53. And then there's even another pair of young people that are atypical for Geen, but we do know that they disappeared during this time period too, and were in some proximity to Gein's farm. So now we've gone from two confirmed murders to one, two, three, four, five, six, seven that are kind of filling in the gaps from 44 to 57.
Yeah, and that would make much more sense with the grave robbing and not being able to have victims, not being able to dig up in the winter. I kind of figured they would start linking some more additional victims to him because, you just don't go from A to Z overnight. There was a continuous pattern you see
Yep.
with these serial killers. So not surprised to see that, but hopefully they were able to give some closure to this, or at least be able to say he may have been responsible for them. Was there any impact on law enforcement? I can only imagine how this impacted the community, but how did they move on from this? And did
Well,
anything come out of this?
this case was actually huge for us in law enforcement because
Oh,
it really sparked the development of the FBI's behavioral analysis unit, right? That really led to the entire development of profiling, of linking these crime scenes and looking at behavioral patterns, victimology, the killer's MO, organized crime, disorganized crime. They gained insights by interviewing Gein, who basically on one hand denied the killings and on the other hand said, well, mom told me to do it, which then they delve deeper into the delusional aspect of these
yeah.
serial killers. So the Gein case was huge in law enforcement for really kind of getting up and running so much of what we now know about in profiling and tracking these violent offenders. It had a huge impact on law enforcement, but it had maybe even, I don't know, bigger but more public impact on the entertainment industry, right, Brandy?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've got movies. I mean, I was kind of shocked. A few of these we know about, right? Like Psycho, the mother's in the rocking chair, right? Okay, mother, I'll kill her, right? The mother telling him to commit these crimes. Um, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, growing up in Texas, John, right? Like we knew about this movie, so many different theories of where Texas Chainsaw Massacre came from. Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yep, the whole
We
making of the skin, right?
yes, like
The
absolutely.
transformation, right? Just like
Yes.
Robert Bloch wrote about in his book Psycho,
That's
Gein was
right.
trying to transform himself, just like the character in Silence of the Lambs. And then you had the main character, Hannibal, in Silence of the Lambs with the cannibalism, right? So
That's
we've
right.
got so many things from this case that have been in popular movies. But you know what, Brandy? To me, what strikes me, none of these movies, no matter how bad they were, none of the movies, and it talked about cannibalism and it talked about murder and decapitation. None of these movies could compare to what actually happened on that farm in Wisconsin. None of the grotesque scenes of any of these horrific movies remotely compares to what those officers saw and heard and smelled when they opened the door to Ed Gein's farm. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of our True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You can also sign up for our True Crime and Wine Wine Club and purchase our wines like the Cold Case we talked to today at CassaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com. So you can profile killers alongside of us as you enjoy wine like Brandy and I think that wraps up our business for today. And with that, I want to thank, of course, Brandy Diamond. As always, she does a great job joining me on this journey. And the amazing Lauren Bedsole back in the Corsicana Command Center. We couldn't do this without you, Lauren. And we're going to see you next time on True Crime and Wine when we present the Big Game Hunter, a serial killer who would kidnap his victims, drive them or fly them to remote locations, strip them naked, and let them loose only to hunt them down like wild animals. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us today for True Crime and Wine. Salute.